Hello. So in this video, we're going to be talking about In the Backhoe's Shadow by Thomas Alan Holmes. And I'm joined by Alan himself. So first off, Alan, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thomas Alan Holmes, a member of the East Tennessee State University faculty, teaches American literature with specialties in Appalachian and Black American literature. His creative and scholarly work has appeared in such journals as Valparaiso Poetry Review, Appalachian Journal, and the North American Review, and recent work has appeared in Still the Journal and Appalachian Places, with additional new work in the forthcoming Alabama volume of the Southern Poets Anthology, so be on the lookout from that, from Texas Review Press. Iris Press published In the Backhoe's Shadow, Holmes's first poetry collection, in 2022. So, first off, Alan, can you give us a brief overview of this book?
I can, now that I put it together. It's a curious thing. I was writing the poems without thinking about putting them together as a book, and then when I realized I had enough to put a manuscript together, I started noticing thematic issues. The main thing I think works its way through this book has to do with how the sense of self changes over the course of the book. It begins with various accounts of boyhood and then various experiences as I go into adulthood and as I've come to find myself as part of the community here in East Tennessee. So I'm following a familiar arc there, I think, and there's some comfort in that, and it provides the opportunity to trace some family legends and offer versions of them, and to incorporate figures from the past, and play with the distinction between myself as a person and this kind of fictional self that I'm creating in the over these very many these many poems, so that it's mainly a tracing of identity, and I think in some ways looking at the past and sorting some issues out and coming to terms with the past in many ways.
Great. So you'd already kind of hinted at this, but most of the poems, I think, take place either in Alabama or Tennessee. So this is, I would say, very, very much in the field of Southern literature. So can you talk about this book in the context of Southern literature? Like maybe talk about your influences or where you see this fitting into a developing canon?
Well, this is a discussion my wife and I frequently have, and we sometimes have this discussion with our friends, that this, even though technically according to the Appalachian Regional Commission, I have lived in Appalachia all my life, there's a different sense of community that we have experienced in parts of Alabama than we've experienced here in East Tennessee. I mean, I think we're much more consciously Appalachian now, and we were much more Southern, consciously Southern then. So I do think that it participates in Southern literature in the aspect that frequently in traditional Southern literature, there's this sometimes false sense of there being this grand tradition that's been lost, you know, and I this is the kind of stuff that gets me in trouble. Okay, there in that we frequently see in Southern literature how the insightful characters come to understand how much harm has been done to any number of people in order to support this high form of living that seems to be the grand old Southern belle, you know, the high plantation life and all these other things. They conveniently forget the the racism, the economic exploitation, and those various things. So there's I did have teachers in public school back then who strongly embraced the lost cause kind of mythology, and so I think what we see frequently in Southern literature, especially modern Southern literature, but particularly spurred by Faulkner, is this willingness to look at beyond the facade of the South. You know, I always think about Quentin Compson and Absalom, and how increasingly horrified he comes as he learns more and more about the past and how many of his traditions have been established. So we, in my opinion, Southern literature and Southern Appalachian literature don't necessarily align, because Appalachian people come from a tradition of being outliers. You know, they would not be the ones who would be the propertied people who would enjoy inheritance from overseas, and then the ability to establish great big prosperous farms and markets at the coast. They were moving further and further westward in order to come up with some kind of hardscrabble existence. So we have in Appalachian literature a sense of I think a keener sense of exploitation by economic forces. You know, not only displacement of indigenous peoples, which is definitely part of it, but also the extraction industry, and you know, the lumber extraction, definitely the coal extraction.
Yep.
And I would even look at a type of health extraction that we've seen particularly in the past few decades, where there would be a tendency to remedy pain engendered and working in the mines, rather than correcting conditions and providing therapy and cures. You know, so I think my work falls into that, as it's wrestling between the one sense of self and the other sense of self. I'm sounding real professory today. I have to apologize for that.
No, I love it. I mean, my partner is a West Virginia poet, so
yes,
I'm more familiar with Appalachian literature and sort of the trends that are going on in contemporary Appalachian. But I think what you were talking about there with the tendency in contemporary Southern literature to sort of peel back the veil, as it were, and sort of say,
mm-hmm.
here are some of the problematic elements of the antebellum South and how those sort of continued into the post-Civil War period.
Yes.
We're seeing similar things in Appalachian literature, where people are embracing these sort of traditions that are critical. But yeah, there's definitely that difference where it is in like West Virginia literature, Kentucky literature that I've read. There's a lot of interest in like the ways in which the environment has been devastated by resource extraction, and the ways which it's sort of post-industrial literature in a way, but it's like post-industrial from the back porch in the holler. We get so many people who have lost their jobs and lost what were once good paying jobs in the mines, as they've moved toward surface mining, strip mining, things like
mm-hmm.
that requires less people. So yeah, that idea of like challenging and coming to terms with what's going on in your region or your society, I think is a really interesting piece. Yeah.
And I hope it helps people to avoid nostalgia.
Yeah.
And and still acknowledge that you can have a great deal of affection for a place, even though you acknowledge a number of errors and flaws. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping to find some kind of a balance like that, rather than having sainted grandparents and that kind of easy hallmark sentimentality in the pieces.
Yeah. So another big, I think, very common element of Southern literature that's clearly at work in this collection is the importance of music. And you yourself are a musician. So can you sort of talk about the relationship between music and maybe yourself as a musician, and then what we see and what we hear in these poems?
Oh, sure. I mean, there are a couple of points. One of them is that as we learn prosody, as we learn meter in pieces, one of the easier ways to recognize that is to listen how songs work, and how we can avoid forcing unnatural stresses in the course of a line, or how we can better work with phrases so that we're not forcing some kind of a sentence into a weird contortion to make a rhyme or something of that nature. So for me, the best compliment is that it sounds like somebody talking, something that's unforced and natural. You're probably aware of the Yeats poem of Adam's Curse, where the speaker talks about how difficult it is to come up with something that seems perfectly natural in a way. So I have found music useful that way, because I can hear how meter should work, and how stresses and emphasis can happen in the course of a line. So prosody's terrifically important. When we teach, it's one of the common situations in teaching American literature when we point out Emily Dickinson's common meter, and then and point out how many songs can be, how those poems can be sung to so many melodies, and so I kind of work that in reverse. The other thing I pay attention to is how sound works in the poems. I had a workshop many years ago with Morris Manning, a Kentucky poet that I'm sure some of your viewers know, and he presented Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem "The Windover," and he read it aloud, and then he said, "Now you need to listen to the tones in the poem." So he worked his way through the poem again, but rather than articulate the consonant sounds, he just made the various vowel sounds, and then that way we could hear the related tones, or how closely different vowel sounds would have, and he pointed out that consonants and punctuation provide the meter of a verse, but the vowel sounds provide the music of the line. I'm kind of paraphrasing there. So, but that drew me towards a sort of consciousness of that I think I sensed before, but then I was eagerly looking at that, and as I was trying to make lines work in various ways. So I know I do allude to music a number of times in my work. There's one poem in particular in the collection where Molly in a red wig plays a fiddle, and it talks about playing a duet and playing Hank Williams songs. But I especially address it there, but from time to time there will be allusions to country music lyrics in there, and just to kind of wink at people every once in a while. To maybe I'm appealing to part of the audience that way. I'm not sure. I always find it curious when we teach literature classes that we frequently don't talk about song lyrics, but because in teaching Appalachian literature, I'm struck that probably many more people know Loretta Lynn's Coal Miner's Daughter than just about any other poem I could pick up. And I understand that probably the books don't include those lyrics because the rights to reproduce them would be extraordinarily expensive, but it's something I bring up in the class as well. You know, everybody wonders about Jolene. Everybody knows the Coal Miner's Daughter, and we continue that way. So Hank has that much resonance as a Southern songwriter.
You had mentioned, this is just a brief thing. You had mentioned Emily Dickinson's poems and how you can set them to the music. My favorite one that I've ever heard, you can set at least Because I Could Not Stop for Death to the Gilligan's Island theme song, which I think is just great.
Yep, and it distresses the students when you do it. But you know, I don't know how much longer we can get away with that because I don't know how many of our students know who Gilligan is anymore. We've got to be careful about aging out.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about another influence in this book, in one particular poem, in Secret Star.
Yes.
Do you mind if I just sort of read the first stanza so that I think viewers may get a sense of where this question is going if they hear.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
All right, so this is the opening stanza of Secret Star. As I was 9 and innocent in my father's car, lying face up in the back floorboard, watching the night sky on a Christmas Eve, alert to see a special light as I still believed in that good holiday, and saw a steady white that did not blink, I took for that star, ignorant of astronomy that every star would blink, and likely saw Venus, white, clear and high in hard, cold December. So to me, this is, I think, pretty clearly an homage to Dylan Thomas's amazing poem, Fern Hill. And I was wondering if Thomas is a particular favorite of yours, a particular influence, or if there was maybe some other backstory to this poem.
I was thinking about Thomas at the time. The complication comes from I studied a lot of British poetry when I was at the university. They did not. I attended the University of Alabama primarily in the 1980s, and at the time they did not teach Appalachian literature as Appalachian literature, and when they taught Southern literature, they would include 2 or 3 authors, definitely Faulkner, frequently Flannery O'Connor, but you know, it was almost as if they were obligated to teach them, but they at the literary canon at the time in that place was not respectful of authors who were seen as regional authors. Now, as years have gone on, we've seen the various achievements of folks in the Southern region and the Appalachian region. We've learned, you know, our literary tastes have come to include many more folks. So
yep.
That's significant. So, but my primary studies in poetry as a college student were major late 19th century and early 20th century poets. So I was reading Dylan Thomas. I mentioned Yeats before, definitely Gerard Manley Hopkins, but Thomas Hardy as well, who is a terrific stylist. I mean, he's careful about meter. He's careful about rhyme scheme. There's almost a watchmaker's precision in a lot of his work, and so I was learning to hear things from them. So I could see the mastery of form from Hardy and Auden in particular. I learned from Yeats that precise concision could be terrifically powerful, and I saw in Thomas and Hopkins that you can be experimental and listen to the sound of things and sometimes let the reins go for a while and have some celebration in the sound of something that in a way that kind of the rigid formal type of material won't permit. So of course we see some of the same qualities in Whitman and for the American literature fans, and I admire how, looking at his free verse, you can get a lot of music in the lines, and then Dickinson, there again, concise works, but sometimes terrifically complex images within that bullet by bullet stanza work that she managed. So I look to new poets and see where they're getting their influences as well. But I did not get to enjoy Appalachian writers until I sought them out after I was a student and came to Tennessee and started paying more attention to the living writers who were around me and paying greater attention to the literary legacy that we find in this particular region of the Mountain South. So.
Yeah. So I love that you talked about sound and musicality as influences there. Because again, connecting back to the question I'd asked before about the role of music. For me, in my opinion, Dylan Thomas is one of the best crafters of sound in all of poetry. And I don't know if you've ever listened to his recordings of him reading his poetry from the early 50s, but to hear him read his works, there's just this incredible musicality. And I think that comes out of that sort of Welsh singing tradition, which is, of course, culturally linked to the Irish and the Scottish and the Scots-Irish traditions that form so much of Appalachian folk songs, ballads, poetry, even prose. So, yeah, I think that musicality and the way that Thomas sculpts the sound of language, even if the meaning is not clear on a literal sense, is the joy of sound, I think, is there. So, I wanted to ask you one more question about this collection, because you have a whole series of poems about the speaker's adventures with Thomas Croft's medievalist. And I had actually interviewed for a job at ETSU earlier this past year, and Thomas Crofts was one of the people on the committee, and I mentioned to him that I had read your series of poems about him, and he said he was a lot less interesting than you had made him out to be.
Oh, well, that's not true, but that's okay.
Yeah. So I mean, can you just sort of talk about the relationship there, maybe the why you decided to create a whole series of poems about yourself and Thomas going on these adventures?
Oh, okay. Well, okay. First of all, my experience has been that the and I'm saying this in a nice, respectful way. Uh, Consistently, the most idiosyncratic member of a literature department is the medievalist. Because they they have seen all kinds of beliefs. But they don't have the same perception of rigid, backward Middle Ages people that that's the common cliche. They see a richness in their culture. They see the way that medievalists enjoy life and the complexity of their beliefs and all these other things. So uh, my experience has been that folks who devote themselves to that period are joyful people and can kind of rip the bandage off just about everything. So I like that a lot. The other thing is Thomas Crofts. I'm a little embarrassed to talk about him, but he's a percussionist, and if you've ever been a musician and you've worked with percussionists, you know that they have a remarkable capacity to think about many different things at the same time, because apparently their brains work the same way they train their bodies to work, where they can manage different rhythms with their limbs at the same time and come up with a great big composite. And I'm saying that with one of my kids as a percussionist, and I so it's just struck me that as I was preparing this manuscript, my publisher referred to Thomas Crofts as my sidekick in these poems, and I said that's not the case at all. If anything, he's the adventurer, and I'm the chronicler of these things that happen. So I began writing the medievalist poems as a way to introduce notions of magical realism into the kind of everyday life in the university. So there are a couple of things that are just well there's one poem that has to do with my having had a camera stuck down my throat, and just notions of mortality. And so the poem winds up with a kind of vision occurring just right in the middle of it, where suddenly Thomas Crofts and I see this patient on a table surrounded by doctors, and I confess I was thinking about Yeats' The Second Coming at the time, where you have a vision and then suddenly all these things. So I always want to point out a couple of things here. So one of them is that those poems are to celebrate the medievalists. I just like that idea, and the other is that these poems provide a remarkable opportunity for me to find things out about people who read the book, and so because there's one poem where the speaker and the medievalist accidentally start a fire in the building, and I have had any number of people come up to me and ask me about whether that happened, and it factually did not happen. Okay, that's just so. It leads to questions. First of all, between the difference between the lyrical I in the poem and the person who writes the poem, and so while Thomas Crofts and Jesse Graves is in another one of those poems, my colleague Jesse Graves, they know they're in the poems. They just kind of laugh about it. It's funny to them, but it's not really Thomas Crofts and it's not really Jesse Graves, just as it's not really me either. We've come up with these versions, and it's also kind of curious as I look at the poems, and we refer to the first person speaker as the lyrical I, that there's also this tendency when you look at a number of poems and it seems as if it's the same lyrical I time and again, that you come up with this kind of composite lyrical I in the course of the volume. So it's been kind of odd since the book has come out for me to look at it and kind of study what kind of version of or presentation of the lyrical I have I made through this piece. It's not something that I was consciously doing as I was writing the poems over the course of years. It certainly wasn't something that I coped with consciously as I was arranging the material into the manuscript. But once the physical thing comes out and I look at it, it goes, what have I made here? Or what kind of impression are people making from this? So, but yeah, there are real people in there. There are times when I'm celebrating friendships with folks, and the Molly with the red fiddle, that's Thomas's wife, So I was over at his house and we were just playing music one evening. So the real people are in there and they know it, and there are a couple of real people in there that I didn't name, but I think folks recognize them. But so the medievalist poems are playful expressions of affection for my friend Thomas Crofts. There are many things I admire about him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. All right. I mean, thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak with me today. The book is really, really interesting. Yeah, I appreciate your insights.
Oh, well, thank you for asking me. I appreciate your time too.